In the final Australian blog post, I'll cover the last part of our trip into the Northern Territories and Aboriginal lands, and then put together a few thoughts on how Aboriginal art has found a voice and become part of modern Australian art. But before leaving for the Northern Territories, we visited Grampians National Park, which is about a 3-hour drive outside of Melbourne, and took the Six Seasons tour. This is an area that's now under the control of an Aboriginal council, and we hired an Aboriginal guide who showed us how the natives had understood there to be six seasons, allowing for better diet and the ability to survive in the environment a bit better. On the left, you see a Paleolithic midden. That is an area that had been inhabited with a trash pit in it. And on the right, you can see some of the local cuisine we were able to take advantage of. This is an emu pot pie. The highlight of the tour by far was learning about the creator god Bunjil and seeing this painting, which goes back 25,000 years. Now, it probably has been touched up in that time period and unfortunately had been defaced within the lifetime of our guide. You can see right over here would have been a painting of an emu that was an important part of the creation story of the area. And unfortunately, somebody had defaced it by putting house paint over it. So this is a difficult tradition to properly protect. And when you take a look at a spot that we hit on the way out of Grampians, this is at Langi-Juran State Park. You can see one of the ways that local governments have sort of taken to protecting these things is to put a cage essentially around them, and then this is a viewing bar where there's no chain link, so that one can see through and actually check out the rock art. From Melbourne, we flew into the Northern Territories to visit rock art sites at Kakadu and Nitmiluk National Parks. This is the Narangi site. You can actually see me. I'm just right there, standing below some of the rock art. This has been continuously painted at for about 22,000 years, and right up here are hands, which are actually up here, that are some of the oldest paintings on the site, and these things are 30 feet up there. They're so high up there that later generations had stories about ancestor spirits that had made them. Here's a bit of a closer look. These are about 22,000 years old. And you would make these by putting your hand on the rock, having chewed ochre, a little bit of water, and then your saliva, and then probably blowing it through a straw or spitting directly out of the mouth in order to make a silhouette of the hand. And I thought this was particularly good right there. You could see all of the outline of the hand. This is another spot, this time at a different cave art site called Ubir, which is high up, and you can see I've just pointed this out to another set of viewers right here who are checking it out, and they were, pointing, so I thought I'd snap a picture of that to demonstrate how high it was. This was a great place for wildlife in Kakadu National Park. We were able to see rock wallabies, and in the bottom you can see a croc that we saw. We saw all sorts of things. And then on top of that is a painting of a thylacine. Now, thylacines have been extinct for at least 4,000 years, so that's another way that one can actually date a painting, is to know that the subject couldn't have been seen by the artist, and then push that date back. There was a spot that was too remote for us to get to, where there's a painting of a Pallarchestes, Pallarchestes, and this is a Paleolithic era species that was extinct for at least 46,000 years, or at least is thought to. And it gives you an idea of how old this painting would be, one of the oldest. The one you're looking at, only about 4,000. Now, from Kakadu National Park, which was absolutely fantastic, we were supposed to take another 3-hour drive way out into the bush, where we had chartered a helicopter, and that was going to take us to 35,000-year-old cave paintings. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see that rock art. The folks at Nitmolek had to cancel on us. We did get a full refund, which was great, but we were really disappointed. And well, this is really the only thing that we missed on the trip. So it was supposed to be one of the most amazing highlights, and so that's disappointing. But having taken a run of about at that point 19 days without missing anything, I guess we were kind of due. Instead, we went back to Darwin, where we'd flown into, and visited the Museum of and Art Gallery of the Northern Territories, and we're able to end the day with this seafood deluxe platter for two. This thing includes three different areas of Australian lobster, two different types of those bugs that I was telling you about, the flat lobsters, had different indigenous shrimp, and you can see calamari rings over there. There's oysters over here. It was it was not disappointing. So at this point, I'm going to switch over and talk about some of the art that we saw in terms of modern art, and then how indigenous artists have found a voice within Australian modern art. It is important to point out that there is a vibrant modern art scene in Australia, really pretty phenomenal. On the left here is Frida Robertshaw's Standing Nude. This is a self-portrait at age 28 from 1944. Um, there was an astounding number of female artists in early Australian modernism. My wife and I were really quite impressed. It wasn't quite 50-50, but it was actually pretty close. And that kind of speaks to maybe the openness of Australian modernism. On the right is a Chinese expatriate artist that we discovered, whose work is just absolutely phenomenal. His name is Ah Xian, and this is China China, bust number 3. And in this particular case, he has done a sculpture in porcelain of a human face and is using sort of uh, traditional blue porcelain designs that you would see on chinoiserie. The effect is pretty incredible. You get this sort of really intriguing, sort of scarification, tattooing look. We saw him do cloisonne pieces. We saw him do pieces where philosopher's stones came out of people's heads. Really just an amazing artist. Here's a piece from 2015. This is Robin Stacey's Room 710 from Tower Mill Hotel. She is an artist working in photographic media who is using the camera obscura and a pinhole effect to project images from outside of sometimes very recognizable rooms in Brisbane, the exterior scenes upside down and backwards onto the walls in interior scenes, and then often setting up narratives. These were phenomenal pieces. Robin Stacey, look for the name. She's going to be pretty darn big. I thought they were really pretty incredible, and it was really great to go through the exhibition with somebody who knew Brisbane, because as we went through, she would recognize where things were, sometimes by the images being broadcast in, and sometimes from the spaces inside. So there was a really intriguing dialogue going in here, and there was also a great demonstration showing how long exposures allowed for color to be shown in these pieces. So also within modern art, there is now a tremendous voice of the Aboriginal people, and the aesthetic of Aboriginal art has become a big part of Australian modernism. On the left here is Hunter and Emu. It's a bark painting from before 1914 from the Western Arnhem. This is actually up and in a similar area to the Northern Territories, or it's part of the Northern Territories, but further west than I made it. And these are pieces that were narrative in nature, but also had they were ritual objects. These became very featured in Australian art in the 50s, and as you can see from Du Warwar Marique's bark painting and Tutini grave marker, there are now modern artists who have signature designs that are sought after in galleries. And I'm going to apologize in advance for any names that I might butcher. I will probably butcher all of them. At that same time in the 50s, there were Aboriginal artists who were working in perspectival European traditions. This is Albert Namatjira's Alice Springs County from 1954, and he was raised in a Lutheran mission in Hermannsburg and went on to popular acceptance as one of the founders of the Hermannsburg School of Watercolorists. So that was another way in which Aboriginal artists could get some recognition. And before I get into the Western Desert, which besides the Arnhem lands and Northern Territory Aboriginal areas, the other area that people really kind of tend to recognize art from in textbooks, I should probably explain that there are a lot of Aboriginal traditions, and I was pretty unaware of how many there were. In going through the various museums that I did, we found out that there were over 350 distinct social groups when Europeans arrived, at least that many, some estimate twice that many. 27 language families have been identified, and 150 languages or dialects are still in use today. From the outside, we tend to look at Australia's Aboriginal people as one unified group, and there are mythological themes that were shared over vast areas, but for the most part, these are separate traditions. Even the didgeridoo was really only used by North Coast Aboriginal peoples, and even the name itself, didgeridoo, was made up essentially by a European anthropologist in the 1920s who thought didgeridoo sounded like the sound that comes from a didgeridoo. Today it's accepted by most Aboriginal people as a sort of a symbol, but in the past that had really only been a small segment of Aboriginal people's tradition. So the second type of art, besides the things that we saw with Tutini and the bark paintings that tends to be recognized, is the art of the Western Desert peoples. And this is a tradition that came to national prominence in the early 1970s when the displaced Papunya Tula people were given art supplies for therapeutic purposes, and they made these absolutely gorgeous pieces, which you see here showcased in the National Gallery in the capital. This piece by Ronnie Jampajunpa from 1981 really shows how a savvy artist could utilize the dots that again we see as indicative sort of from the outside of Aboriginal art in a way that's very, very modernist in its approach. The way he uses rhythm and repetition really made for amazing compositions. I thought this was a really incredible piece too by Clifford Possum Chapaljari. It's a 1977 piece entitled Warlunglong. And here you have these gorgeous dots and such, and if you get right up here on the edge, you can see that he's actually included skeletal imagery inside those dots. Really amazing stuff. Here's Junkara Ken's Seven Sisters. This is a much more modern piece from 2012. And you can see by modern time that sort of Western tradition, Western Desert tradition, fades into modernism in just a really, really beautiful and lyrical way. Now, my guide up in the Grampians, he didn't like this idea at all. He really thought that these paintings should use earth and pigment colors in a sort of traditional way. And I kind of went back and forth with him on that a little because this is a way in which Australia is now accepting and showcasing a lot of its Aboriginal history. And he sort of saw that point too. It was a very interesting conversation. There's also a popular acceptance of Aboriginal artists and ideas within a postmodern tradition in Australia. And here's one that just has an absolutely fantastic dialogue. It's Tony Albert's Ash on Me of 2008. And this is an installation piece in which he's stenciled the phrase Ash on Me and then has taken actual ashtrays that were popular in the early part of the 20th century and did not really do a very good job of showcasing Aboriginal people as real people. I mean, these are real ashtrays that are like the Sambo character from the USA or a gollywog in the UK. I mean, they're pretty darn offensive. They might be outright erotic. They might be very kind of mean or joking. These are not things that if I were Aboriginal, I would have very much liked. And it really sort of brings that heritage to the forefront and allows for very interesting conversations. So, after 3 long weeks, it was really nice to fly out of Darwin, which, by the way, was 100 degrees and 80% humidity. It was so sweaty. It hasn't been that bad for me since we went to India. It's nice to fly back to the very, very mild weathered Brisbane, where we spent a little bit more time decompressing with family just a day or two before we went. And this is the view from my sister-in-law's back porch of Brisbane. Really quite gorgeous. And Sarah and I are enjoying one last breakfast before a 30 plus hour travel day home. You have to kind of want it to put the travel time in, and I have to say, it was absolutely worth it.